Right, I think a couple minutes has passed, so we can go ahead and get started. Of course, if you have any questions along the way, feel free to ask, or you can ask towards the end, whichever you prefer. But we can go ahead and get started. Hi, everyone. Welcome to our 41st webinar, 41, 41st webinar. Today we'll be talking about storytelling in marketing and storytelling in your brand in general. One of the things that I think is often overlooked is how you can weave in a story within your brand and also in your marketing, as well as in your website and other things that cover, you and your store. I think some of the stuff that we'll talk about today is like, yeah, that makes sense, but I also want to kind of go into the details of how these all could benefit you in your store. Firstly, I think in general, creating a more I would say one-to-one relationship with your brand and who you are as a person, or how you decide to do your art, if you sell art, for example, becomes a really important component because I think a lot of artists and a lot of store owners who sell art tend to fixate on the aesthetics of their brand and also the imagery and how it is aesthetically pleasing to the viewer. But there is another layer to it, if you will, when it comes to storytelling and also your brand. And it's creating a more, I would say, emotional bond between the customer, the audience, and your store and your art. I think as artists, if you are in the traditional atmosphere of making art, you know that when you are pitching your art to sellers or to museums or to exhibitions, there is things like theses and things like them coming to your studio to know more about your art process. Think about that, but now on the online, I would say, stage where you're no longer necessarily doing that if you're selling art to regular customers, that is B2C. But now you're going to be talking to a larger audience, and what used to be the art dealer or the exhibition owner is now, audiences of 100 or a dozen or 1,000. Um, and so you kind of have to kind of translate that storytelling technique that you may be used to or you're maybe more, I guess, knowledgeable on when it comes to traditional art selling and art, I would say marketing, now in online space, which is very easy, you know, like initially it seems easy, but I will say there are some nuances that you should consider, and as well as acknowledge the advantages you have of being an artist selling your art online, because what other brands of other industries fail to have is compelling imagery. And I think if you sell art, you already have that base foundation of having imagery that might have emotional connections with people. Because, talking to people who do abstracts, who do illustrations, and much more. They'll tell you offset that a lot of customers tend to purchase the art because it evokes an emotion out of them. And think about how that plays into the purchasing factor and see how you can apply that same ideal or same aspect into your own store or your own marketing campaign. One of the many benefits of selling and, putting at the forefront a storytelling kind of premise with your brand is that, yes, past the aesthetics of your art, there is then an emotional connection. And I think one of the many misconceptions about storytelling when it comes to brand building is that it doesn't seem it seems disingenuous, or it seems like you're leveraging, emotions to get a sale. But at the end of the day, I think two things could coexist, and those two things are a good marketing strategy and also building a lasting impression with your customers through the art of storytelling and the art of kind of building a good brand through the art form of storytelling. It's something that customers and audience members tend to be appealed to already from the offset, not necessarily with and generally buying a purchase, but with engaging with something. And nowadays, it is hard to engage people into your social media posts or your emails or anything else related to marketing. But if you have emotions there and you have genuine and true stories or genuine points of your brand, then I think it becomes a lot more, um, I would say, engaging and also a bit more, you know. you being vulnerable to your audience, or what seems to be vulnerability to your audience. And they always appreciate that. It builds trust. And one of the first most strong, compelling emotions people feel when they're engaging with the brand is trust. Think about how people utilize reviews and look at what other people have to say, like testimonials. So if you show some vulnerability, it's showing some trust. I think another part of it in tying in with that trust is also authenticity and transparency. As I said, you want to make sure these stories are true to you and these emotions that you're trying to evoke through your marketing campaigns have a source of authenticity and are coming from a place that you have experience and or expertise with, or something you experienced in your life that you feel would be interesting to share in conjunction with your brand and make sense with your brand. Um, of course, I think in general, you want to make sure that it has positive emotions overall. Some emotions that tend to bode well with customers is nostalgia, excitement, and oh, again, as I mentioned before, trust. So those are some three components to consider when you want to start off with storytelling and you don't know where to start. You could either dive into people's sense of nostalgia, create some form of excitement with either talking to a customer testimonial, or your reaction to something good happening to you. Say you got into an exhibition and you're really excited about that. Overall, general feel good emotions, something that brings a smile to people's faces, is going to result in them having a good reception to your brand overall, and thus making them more interested in your brand and also your store, especially if you can then tie in that excitement or those feel good emotions into products or a way to go and check out your store where you'll find some other key points that might interest them into purchasing your art. Right now, what I'm going to do is also kind of show a presentation because I just kind of give you an introductory of why storytelling is meaningful, but I also want to put it onto pen and paper for you to kind of understand the importance of matters. And I see that someone raised their hand. Feel free to speak if you'd like, or you could text as well. Up to you.
I I have a problem with promoting my brand because I just started on Amazon and you can't have a brand on there until you have a trademark, which is a lot of money. So I'm just selling it without a brand. My brand per se is all over the place. Like one day I sell wallpaper. I design and sell wallpaper. So one day it is little kids playing on the playground repeated over and over, and then one day it's this dark and moody stuff. So my brand doesn't follow any specifics about me, just that I am all over the place
Mhm.
is the best thing I could say. So in my descriptions, do I just pretend like I'm not going with a brand and I just do a description specifically for that piece of art itself until I can do a brand?
Yeah, that's very interesting. And great on you to start an Amazon store. It's really an interesting pl platform to be on from what I've heard. Um, in terms of how brand and brand identity works on stores where you tend to sell multiple genres, cover multiple different themes, I think, as you're developing your brand and figuring out what you want to kind of put at the forefront, um, you don't necessarily have to put on the forefront a specific genre per se, but if you could put to the forefront things that tend to bode well with everything, for example, quality, maybe the artist or the person who's behind the imagery, things that tend to perk people's ears up when things like, benefits or sales. Sometimes when it comes to storytelling, when you have a very broad store, it really is dependent on a lot of factors. But if you feel like there's no one way to kind of put yourself into one category, I think you can hone in on the overlying and overarching, I would say, themes, such as, sourcing where you source your materials, who the person behind the art is, and things of that, where you're from. And so at least it builds some sort of connection, and you could put it towards all of your art in general, because I imagine you're probably doing multiple listings. It might be a little bit overwhelming if you have to do individualized descriptions for everything. Um, Another thing you could do, part of storytelling is, if you want to do it for each of your products, you could utilize the product images that they have available on Amazon and offer, I would say, I think they call them mock-ups or templates of like what the room would look like with the imagery there. So if you have a kid's room, for example, and it's a kid theme wallpaper, having some extra items in that template would also help kind of give people an idea of what this product is for, and thus make it a bit more compelling when they see the product listing over others that might just be the pattern or it on a general mock-up where it might be an adult's room, but it doesn't make sense for it to have a kid's wallpaper. So there's small touches you can do, as well as also keep in mind that having a broad descriptor is good for the start of it, especially if you have a lot of listings. And if you feel, you know, you want to later in the future when you want to refine your audience or see what works and what doesn't work, such as specific tags and specific descriptors, then you could go ahead and do that. But at least starting with a strong general description with things honing in on who you are as the seller and or who are the artists, and also keeping in mind also like where the product comes from, how it's made, or other components that you think customers would be interested by when it comes to the how it's made process. Um, Hopefully I
I
covered your
like the
question.
idea of the nostalgia
Hmm.
because I seem to find that that comes up when I'm getting ideas of what to draw.
Hmm.
That's usually where it comes from.
Yeah, and if you want to make that your overarching brand or a big component of it, I think honing in on nostalgia is broad enough where it could cover different forms of memories for people. But it also, can elicit a specific emotion that is still strong in your marketing moving forward. So hopefully this is of interest for you. I will cover some other stuff within this webinar. But if you have any other questions as a result of the presentation, do let me know. I'm glad that you're asking these questions, and it's good to hear how people are, doing on places like Amazon, because people are always asking about different platforms. So it's good to hear from you guys. Thank you. Let me go ahead and then share the presentation, and we'll talk more about some things you can utilize moving forward into crafting your storytelling and also your brand. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Give me one moment. Okay, just checking in with Sarah to see if she can see my screen. Perfect. All right, so I would say starting with the components uh, of a the components of a compelling story, as we mentioned previously, one of the forefront parts is having genuine, honest, and true brand values, and involves sharing real stories that resonate with audiences. It could be your brand in general, or it could be a particular campaign that you're doing, or it could be a specific product that you want to promote. You could definitely revolve a story around a piece or a story around a set of art pieces in general. Um, I think when it comes to tone and voice, you always want to be more positive, and if you are going to talk about some heavy topics, sometimes people create art out of things that brought them sadness at one point, but maybe also talk about things and how it's, made you feel better, or um, overall wanting to leave it on a positive note, because associating sadness with your brand is always not the best thing to keep in mind. You want to be a bit more positive overall. And then when it comes to crafting your story, I brought some key points here, and one of which is understanding your target audience. I know that some people tend to figure out, well, am I being too niche? Am I being too broad? There's always that question in hand. I think that to understand whether you're going too niche or too broad with how you target your audience, often uh, utilizes A/B testing. That is making testing that is, made for, say, a niche audience, and then testing that is for a more wide audience. And I can see why you can't do 50-50 on this and basically see what gives the most impressions and also most engagement. You could post something that's widely liked, but you might not get as many comments or as many sales as a result to something that does well. Whereas if you do something a bit more niche, you might get some more comments or more interactions. People share it more and or buy it on your store more. And you kind of have to understand like what is the balance. Um, my go-to is always mix it between one of the two. You don't want to dive too deep into your niche where, you kind of isolate potential customers that might be interested in your artwork. But if you're too broad, you're also not tapping into people who might be more interested in purchasing something than people who just are enjoying the work and then moving on to the next product. So understanding your target audience, doing research on basically who is your niche audience and also who are your prospective audience that you want to bring in that is a more broad number of people or number of possible customers. Analyzing your competitors, this is not only seeing how you can do things similarly, but how you can do some things differently. And from there, you can kind of see what are the market gaps or what's missing that your competitors are offering that you can offer. And this can be in the form of imagery, form of products that you're selling, or in the form that you're conveying your story through the means of social media, email, and things of the like. Um, if you feel like there's some things you really like about your competitor, but there's other things you rather not have, feel free to kind of emulate some of the things that you find very powerful about their marketing, and kind of utilize it to your advantage while making it yours and something authentic to you as a person. Of course, if your competitors are not doing something remotely close to what you're doing, maybe it's worth then seeing how you could do things differently in your own brand and your own style. And kind of tying in with that, evaluating what you're offering in terms of your products and what makes them unique and what makes them artistically, I would say different from everyone else. And how can you highlight that in your brand and highlight that within your general brand awareness? I think another thing that you should also keep in mind when keeping in the forefront is brand values. So seeing what your core and your missions are, I know that for some folks, they just want to sell the art. They don't necessarily are interested in conveying missions or values, but you'd be surprised on how powerful that is for customers when they're searching your store. And oftentimes, if you're very open about your brand values and your mission, they're going to either bode really well with it or be indifferent to it. But at the very least, those who tend to resonate strongly with your mission or your values are more likely to purchase from you. So keep that in mind. Um, and even then, it doesn't always have to be like your moral standings on certain topics. It could even be the foundation of your store and where you came from. These are just some items that, are unique to you as a store brand and no one else may have. But it will elicit a sense of closeness between you and the customer. The next part is to define your unique selling points. And I think it's good to start with at least 3 or 5 unique selling points that are going to address the desires or the needs of your customers. Both focus on the benefits of what it means to have your art in their house or as a gift for someone else. There are many ways you can kind of tell people, here's what happens when you have my art in your bedroom. It elicits a sense of calmness, or it looks vibrant in, rooms that might need a touch of color. There are ways you can go about, selling unique points and unique features about your art that might not, be found in other places because other places they might just have the product listing, the descriptor, but there's nothing really to tie in their thoughts with the art piece. And sometimes you have to bridge that gap. I know that, let the art speaker for itself is common said, but sometimes you do need to do a little push, a little bit of influencing in order to kind of have customers realize, hey, maybe this will look good in my walls and it might look good in my home. So keep these in mind when you're thinking about unique selling points. Again, I recommend starting with 3 to 5 and building up from there. And as kind of a way of moving into that, integrating those unique selling points into your brand story. So, now that you kind of have in mind what are the things that make your art unique or make your products, something that will benefit your customers, figure out how to then interweave that into the storytelling of your brand and using real life examples, such as people's testimonials, or maybe if a customer has emailed you and said, your art piece has brought a lot of joy to my home and I really appreciate seeing it every day. Bring that to the forefront and ask if you could bring that story into your social media or your email, with the customer's permission, of course. But don't miss out on what it could be very heartfelt and I would say captivating posts about your art and how it affects people. And in general, you want to make sure your messaging is consistent. I know we talked about, if you have a broad brand, there might be different avenues you want to take into different areas, such as genres or themes. But as long as your base level value or foundation is there, maybe the look and feel of your logo or your website is enough to, stay consistent. Those are some aspects, but you don't want to be changing too much of your brand every time there's a different campaign, unless, of course, it's a bit more strategic. But you want to keep an underlying, I would say, value and or kind of story to your store in general. Okay. And then when it comes to how you integrate your storytelling, there are different places to do so, and you guys are probably familiar with all, if some, if not all of these. But just to kind of explain further, when it comes to your website or blog content, this is probably the one I see that's most likely overlooked. People tend to focus more on social media, video, and email campaigns, which is fine, but don't underutilize your website because you pay for it most likely. And there's a lot of efforts you can put into it so you make the most out of your money because it's one thing to have a platform that sells your products. It's another thing where you could sell your products and do marketing on your platform at the same time. And so with your website, consider incorporating customer testimonials, case studies, product stories, and all these things that could either one, compel the customer to want to purchase the product, or two, it builds trust with your customer because they see either reviews, testimonials, or things that help build credibility and trust. Um, Things like the homepage are a great way to utilize storytelling. Things like if you have a carousel or a slideshow of your images or products that you're selling on your homepage, see how you can link it to a blog or to a place where they can learn more about your products. And specifically how they're made, maybe the process behind them. Oftentimes, when I'm looking at an artist's page for their art or seeing their portfolio, one of the cooler aspects that I tend to click on for me personally is that if they show a process of how the art came to be, if they use interesting techniques such as utilizing rust, utilizing brush strokes that are unique to them, maybe a specific type of process that is, no longer as popular as it is now, or even if they're a digital artist, see where their inspiration came from and kind of write kind of a I would say a small blog of what the thought process was. And, to some people, you might think, oh, that's a bit fussy, or isn't it just being too explanatory about my art piece? Don't think of it that way. Think of it as if people are compelled by your art and they'll buy it from the get-go, that's great. But say there's a customer who wants to learn more about it, you're offering that kind of reading material for them, and it might compel them into a purchase. So don't ever think it's doing too much if you're excited to talk about your artwork and talking about it either on your website or blog form, or as we'll explain later as well in social media and video marketing. That's also great as well. Speaking of social media in general is a great dynamic space, and there are different platforms. Many of some just to list is Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Pinterest, and the like. So there's plenty of platforms to choose from, and oftentimes I get the question of where do I market myself? Do I market myself with all my efforts on all platforms, or do I focus on one? It really is dependent on one, where are you doing really well with already? Two, where is the platform you could see further development in? And three, um, where will the storytelling campaign work best on? If you feel like your next campaign is word heavy, consider a blog format such as Tumblr. If it's image heavy, consider a place like Instagram. And even then, you could probably go further down the niche of platform by seeing where the engagement is when you decide to promote your storytelling. across all platforms and doing testing from there. So I would say start with an initial campaign, do it on all the platforms you're already on, and maybe one or two that you haven't gone into yet, but you're interested in developing further, and see where that takes you. And if you notice that there's a jump in interactions more so on one place than the other, consider then developing that platform or those one or two platforms even further. Um, I think that video content is just as important too. I know that with the rise of TikTok and websites emulating those that TikTok video feed, where it's short videos, constant stream of them coming through. I know that with TikTok, that's its platform. With YouTube, it's YouTube Shorts, and with Instagram, it's Instagram Reels. See how you can kind of wrap your storytelling around that type of content. It's hard to kind of wrap up a story, or if you're talking about something in depth, to wrap it in within what, 60 seconds. But if you can at least do a couple sentences and, really, I would say loop in the customer, you can do multiple parts of what is one video into different parts over different videos. And, for some places, for example, TikTok, you can do long form on TikTok, and that's available. On YouTube Shorts, that is only a minute, but you could also make it a YouTube video and then break it up into shorts on YouTube. And then for Instagram Reels, right now, the time limit doesn't come up to the top of my head, but multiple story parts is also okay and bodes well on that platform. um, Things like music, visual effects that you can utilize. There's ways that you can do it. And I think a good way to start is to look at what other people are doing that works well for them. And they don't necessarily have to be your competitors. They can be people you really enjoy seeing content from. And, if you already enjoy seeing their content and you like the way they tell their stories, or they do story times, or how they sell their brand, feel free to take inspiration from them and see what works for them. Finally, email campaigns and newsletters. I did receive a question about this, and I'll bring it up now because it's very relevant to this key aspect. And that was a person by the name of Ruby was asking, they tend to create and share a lot of content for social media, but they haven't really developed their email list. How can they keep the audience interested in their stories after they already shared something on social media, but also want to put on their email campaign? And I think this is a great question in terms of content that you see on your social media platforms and then content you see in your email campaigns. I think email campaigns are for, they can be for your general people who are customers who've bought once or twice, but they could also be seen as sort of quote unquote an exclusive club who gets maybe a more deep dive of stories that you might have posted on your social media of choice, but maybe lar in the email campaign or email newsletters, you're going to be a bit more in depth and a bit more, you know, uh, open to how you explain things and maybe provide pictures that aren't there on the social media website. So there are ways you can go about that. Another way you can go about it is maybe if you're going to talk about say you're going to enter a exhibition for your art and you're showing people on social media like, hey, I got into this exhibition, look how cool, and see what my art's going to be there. On the email campaign or newsletter, what you can do is kind of show the behind the scenes of that and how that came to be. Maybe talk about how, you emailed the exhibitionist or the exhibition seller, and what the relationship was like, or maybe talk about the day of and what it felt like grabbing your art pieces and setting up your exhibition. So there's ways to go about it where the email campaign and the social media campaign won't be one-to-one, and it won't bore customers when they click on it. Instead, they'll be intrigued because they might have seen you on social media, be like, oh yeah, they did do that thing, that event, or they did, talk about this product. But in this email campaign, they're going to talk more at length to it, and maybe it'll link to a blog. So there's ways you can definitely execute a successful email campaign without being redundant. Um, from what I've seen, of course, I follow a couple of artists' newsletters myself personally, and one of the cooler things that I tend to get is early or exclusive early access to products or sneak peeks into what they'll be selling. And then probably a couple days later, I then see it on their social media. So if that's anything to get started with, maybe start your email campaigns a couple days early before you get into your social media campaigns. That way, people who have purchased from you before or people who are dedicated enough that they subscribe to your email newsletters that they'll see it on social media, but they know the more details about it, but they're really excited that you're sharing it with other people now. But at least it gives them the sense of being inside of an exclusive club of some sort. But moving on into but in general, sorry, going back. In general, integrating storytelling across different social media platforms and also your website and email campaigns, there are multiple ways to go about it. And overall, we'll talk about measuring the success rate of these and how, you can, see what works and doesn't work for you. You definitely want to see what elicits the most engagement, not necessarily the most impressions. And to differentiate the two, it's are you getting lots of likes on something but no comments? Or if you go to the next one, are you getting some likes, but there are more people interacting with your post? You want to make sure you hone in on those who are actively engaging with your work and also developing the posts that do encourage engagement further. So, it's great and you get that sense of dopamine when something gets a lot of likes, but it's a world's different when you get something that elicits a lot of comments or people sharing the piece or sharing the posts with others. So you want to see what is more tried and true overall when it comes to engagement and versus impressions. But moving on to the next topic, I think visual storytelling is a very key part. And I think, as I mentioned here, as artists and art sellers, your visual storytelling can be the art that you sell yourself, where other brands and other companies lack visuals, you have plenty of. So don't be afraid to leverage your pieces as the focal point of your storytelling. And some quote unquote easy ways you can go about it is talk about how it was created, maybe showing videos of the art process and what makes it unique to you. Maybe talking about it yourself to the audience as the artist, saying, this is what I was inspired by, or this is how this is how it ties in with me and my story, or this art piece was from a very unique experience that I had and I want to share it with you guys. But it at least develops a bridge between you and the customer with the pieces that you have as well. So it's kind of a three-way tie between, or three-way bond that is the customer with you, the customer with the products, and you with your products. So all these things connect into each other through the mode of storytelling is a very interesting and key feature that you should tap into as an artist because as I said at the beginning, where you used to try to sell your art to people who come to your studio and you would talk to them, about your art piece and talk to them about your process. Now you're doing it on a very much more public scale and an online version of that. So there's a way you could go about it, and you might have some experience with this already. Now it's just taking it to the online sector. When it comes to creating that said compelling visual content, social media is a great way to do it. But you definitely want to do it on the platform or area where it's very easy to convey deeper meanings, enhance the imagery as it is, and bring it as a focal point alongside some really cool descriptors or ways you can explain what the piece means to you. Again, you don't always have to look at direct competitors. You can always look at what companies are doing it right. And for example, I decided to use National Geographic as an example because for them, their Instagram does really well because they're not only offering really cool photography, which they're known for, but they're also sharing stories that captivate audiences with really cool captions that really bring the image to the customer and the customer engaging further with National Geographic because to them it's like, oh yeah, okay, I could get cool images from them, but I could also get really cool stories from all around the world that they have a unique perspective on because you have to admit there's not a lot of accounts that are like National Geographic where they have people on the scene and people who are going to these places that are so unique that not everyday people go to. So they are using one of the upselling one of their unique, sorry, selling features, which is, they have journalists on the floor or on the ground in these unique areas and, kind of explaining further what the process was or learning, talking about their experience there. I just decided to use this really cute interaction or cute part of National Geographic's post, which is just talking about baby elephants and how the trunk is something that they're not really cognizant of, but it becomes a key part of their, anatomy later in life, and it's part of such amazing functions such as drinking water or, keeping dust out of their, place where they breathe. Um, and so they share it in video content and video form, which is great. They have a really cool caption, as you can see here. Um, and they also, in general, have really good tags, and they're also promoting things on where they sell things or where their marketing efforts are, which is here, for example, it's Disney Plus and Hulu is where they're going to promote this item. And as you can see here, just by a couple comments, there's plenty more from what I saw, but people were really enjoying the content there as well. And as well, they got a lot of impressions through likes. So I know that, not everyone's a National Geographic, but everyone has a unique selling feature or a unique perspective when it comes to their art. So think of yourself as like, how can I make my unique selling feature the focal point as well as the imagery that I sell? And then, of course, getting into measuring this impact and what is the result of you deciding to, say you want to start creating a storytelling brand or want to storytell your brand today or tomorrow. What does that look like, and how are you going to measure the success rate with that? So, as I said, video content on social media is great. Maybe starting a blog about your art process, promoting that on your website are great starting points. And then from there, this is how you can kind of evaluate how successful these are. Um, as I said, spread out on multiple platforms initially and then develop further where has been the most successful key areas been and what type of storytelling has worked for you. I would consider doing probably one or two different types of storytelling to see if there's a difference. And that's where A/B testing comes in. You tend to hear that a lot in marketing, but specifically email marketing. But I don't see why that can't be applicable to social media, especially if you think one form of post does well on one part of the platform, whereas a different type of social media post will do better elsewhere. Say you want to do the same story, but you want to write it in blog form on one place, but you want to then do the visuals on another place. That's perfectly acceptable, and it'll also help you see what resonates with people better, written form, a mix of both, or visuals primarily. So don't be scared of testing different ways as long as the overall messaging is the same. You can even do different descriptors of the story or different tags as well, as long as the underlying story or the theme around it is relatively the same. You should be good to go. And as we said, further, you could adjust your narrative based on the engagement and feedback. I know we talked about consistency, but sometimes it takes a little bit of, I guess, grunt work to figure out where your footing is and what bodes best with people. Always stay true to yourself. I will say stay authentic, but there are ways you can rewrite things that are still true, but now they are better at engaging your customers. Um, Take notes on what keywords or key phrases are most, popular with people. Say you decide to use one sentence phrasing in one post, and then you post a different blog that has a similar theme, but now has different wording. Which one has the most impressions? You can kind of garner from there. Which one you can then, take to the next level, that is, develop it further so it's more successful. And probably, kind of stay off from the ones that have not done well, or if you feel like they're struggling, maybe it's best to then kind of put those, on the lesser priority than the ones that are doing well. And as always, when it comes to marketing, and if you decide to be your own marketing, person for your store, it's one thing to just post and then leave them at that and see how they do over the course of 2 months. But what you want to do is see the general development of interactions? Is there an initial interest and then it drops off? Does it build more as days pass? There are ways to monitor and evaluate the metrics that you put onto it. And one of the ways that we highly recommend is creating kind of APIs or definitely places of pinpoints where you can improve or succeed and creating goals for yourself. So, say in 3 months you want to have 100 more followers, or you want to have, 50% more purchases on your store than usual. Create those goals or metrics and see how you can work towards those and see then at the end of those 3 months, for example, where you lie and how far you reached your goal, maybe what's lacking, and then how can you surpass that goal in the next cycle. So, when it comes to measuring the impact, I would say definitely A/B testing, or that is testing different types of storytelling on different platforms. And then, secondly, develop your feedback further and how you can then prioritize the ones that created good engagement and probably figure out how you can kind of, put those at the forefront in comparison to the ones that aren't doing as well. And then lastly, creating goals for yourself is a very strong way to start off with, you know, ground zero. Say you don't have much experience in marketing. If you set some goals for yourself, it's gonna let you know then how you can reevaluate the goals for the future and see where you can improve and where you can, put more effort into overall. Okay. And let me stop sharing my screen so we can get into some questions and answers. If you have some questions, feel free to ask them here. Raising your hand is a great way to let me know that you want to talk. You can also leave it in the meeting chat. That's also an option. In the meantime, while people are collecting their thoughts, I did have a question or two from some customers. I already addressed one regarding the email marketing list, but some other question was, someone said, my target audience is pretty specific. Is it better to focus on them and risk losing a wider sales base? Or do you think focusing on them will create the same sales within a narrower base? And that's from Kim. And my response to that is, as I mentioned earlier, I say both are very important to you, and both will yielding success, because what you don't want to do is have a very niche audience, but there's no growth in that audience. You always want to grow your audience and your customer base. Even if you're working within a niche, you could still find growth. But if you find yourself stagnating on that niche audience, then there is then the opportunity to open yourself up to other audiences who can be niche themselves as well, but at the very least, you're also aligning yourself with another audience base. And oftentimes people ask, then, what are my potential audience bases? And I would say if you have competitors or if you have people who have similar aesthetics to you, look at to see what they're selling and what type of customers they're eliciting or they're bringing into their stores, and see how you can also market to them. And so, broader audiences are always great because you can kind of then get a read of who's catching interest, but it's so hard then to keep up with always having to be broad and also specific. What I tend to recommend is have 2 to 3 specific niches, or at least two to start with, 2 niches that you can market yourself to. And they don't have to be radically different from each other. They can be slightly different, but compelling enough that you know your audience. For example, if you look at department stores, for example, they tend to have 2 big niches, and that is women who are older and women who are younger. And when it comes to selling clothes, they tend to figure out, okay, what is clothing and or styles that bode well with younger audiences, and then what are, clothing and aesthetics that bode with older, more mature audiences. The space is still welcoming to both, age groups, but then, how are they making sure that both are being tended to? So think of yourself as that department store. How can you make the store friendly for those 2 audiences to be in the same space and buy similar, if not same products, but making sure that the campaigns that you do also don't throw one target audience off over the other. So there is a way to finesse that. And I think instead of thinking about it as broad audience groups, think about it as two audience groups that you can hone in and develop and make sure that they're always growing. If you notice that both groups are stagnating, that's when you should probably start developing a third audience group. So hopefully that is some interest to you. Um, Another question by a person named Crystal, they asked if we can offer a price guide. And my understanding from offering a price guide from Lumaprints is that you're probably interested in how you can price your products. In which case, I think we did a webinar a bit early in our webinar seasons. Where we talked about how to price your products. But if you guys are interested in a new one that talks a bit more in depth about it, we're always open to doing that. And maybe we could offer some new pinpoints after we talk to some customers about this. There's always new knowledge to kind of talk about further in these topics, such as how do you price your products? Because I know that for some people, um, it's easy for them to conceptualize selling their product for thousands of dollars, whereas for other artists, for them selling their art in the 20s and 50s makes more sense for them and their audience base. I know that it is generally one of the things that people tend to ask more when they're starting up their stores, but I still think it's a really interesting topic, regardless of how long you've been selling your art. I would even say that even if you have an art store for a couple years now, it's always great to reevaluate your prices and see how maybe you can start, upselling your prices. Maybe reevaluate, hey, maybe my art is worth more than I perceived it initially. In which case, a price guide, I think we could definitely do one in the future where we talk more about moving forward, whether you're just starting or you're already established and you're seeing what you can do with your pricing. But those are the questions I got from the Google Forms, which we tend to post in our emails about these webinars. If there are any other questions, do let me know. Okay, if there are no questions, I'll still keep this on for a couple more minutes in case someone has some last minute questions. We'll still respond in the chat. Just as a reminder, we do post these webinars on YouTube, usually within the week after or before the week ends, if not the early next week. That way you can, if you had any points here that you thought were interesting, or if you want to look back at some slides that I posted here, you can do so on YouTube. Feel free to subscribe to us there in case I know 10 a.m. on Thursdays are always not the most convenient time for people, but if you ever want to look back on these afterwards, we do post them there, and as well as past webinars too. So anything that you were interested in prior or anything you'll be interested in the future, but you might miss will always be on YouTube. But if there are no questions, then I'll see you guys next week. So have a good rest of your week and we'll see you next time. Bye bye.